Welcome back to 30 Days of Lightroom. We are here in Adobe Lightroom Classic. We're looking at some macro photos that I've shot of some flowers. And in this video, we're going to talk about our histogram. What is a histogram? How do we read a histogram? And what does all of this mean? So let's hop right into learning about our histogram in Lightroom Classic. So we can find our histogram up in the upper right-hand corner. We're in our Develop module. And we have our little histogram right here. We can see we have already toned this image. This image of this flower looks pretty good. So we will go ahead, we will close our basic tab, and we will see our histogram. It's right above all of our adjustment brushes and our crop tool. And I love to keep my histogram open the entire time I'm working. So what exactly is your histogram? Your histogram is a graphical representation of all of the tones in your image. You can see if we highlight over our histogram, we will see certain sections get highlighted in our histogram. We have our exposure, which is our midtones right here in the middle. We have our highlights towards the right. All the way at the right, we have our whites. We have our shadows towards the left of our midtones, and we have our blacks on the far left. You can see all of our tones here are pretty evenly distributed throughout this image. This image has a lot of tones here, and you can see a lot of color values here as well. Now, to simplify this a little bit, I'm going to hit the letter V on the keyboard. That turns our image black and white. So now we're seeing a graphical representation here of just our pure tones, no color yet. And we'll get into color here in a minute. But I want to make this very simple so you can understand the histogram. Now, I like to think of our histogram kind of like a salad bowl. You can see it's kind of bowl shaped here. We have a bottom, we have two sides, and we want to keep all of our values, all of our mix of colors here within our salad bowl. Once those values go out of the salad bowl, they are lost forever. So I'm going to open our basic tab back up here just to give you guys an example. And I'm going to turn my exposure up. Now that's pretty bright, and you can see all of my values here are going towards the right-hand side of the histogram. They're all overexposed here in the whites, and they're being what's called clipped. And when you clip your highlights, you can see they are pure white, and we have lost all of this detail in our highlights. And we can do the same thing if we were to take a photo that is underexposed, or we edit our photo to be very dark. You can see we're losing detail now in our shadows. All of this detail that we had over here is now gone, and we can even push that to the extreme. Now we're losing detail in the leaves right here. And if I export this as a JPEG, all of this detail will be forever lost. When detail is clipped, it is lost forever. So again, when you take a photo that's either overexposed or underexposed, pay attention to our histogram there and how it's moving. If we lose things out of the salad bowl, just like salad, if it goes flying out of the salad bowl and onto the floor, you of course don't want to eat it again, and it is lost forever. So hopefully that'll help you remember histogram and clipping. If things are too dark, they will be lost forever. And if things are too bright, they will be lost forever. So you want to keep your tones within your histogram and within our little mixing bowl right here. So my histogram really helps me when I'm editing, no matter what edit I do, whether it's highlights or shadows, whites or blacks. I want to keep my tones within my histogram. That is an easy way to tell how your editing looks. You may be working on a very dark monitor, but you'll always know what your image will look like on every monitor if you are keeping your tones within your histogram. Your image should never be too dark or too bright, no matter what display someone is looking at it on. Now, if it's too hard to tell if your highlights are clipping, your histogram is only so big in Lightroom. This is as big as I can make it. There are these fun little points in the upper right and the upper left, these little arrows right here, and we can select those. I'm going to turn this one right here, and this is our highlight clipping. So when I turn my highlights up, you can see we are clipping here in this bright red zone. So it's marking all of the places where the detail is going to be clipped or completely lost if we turn our exposure up too high. So let's reset our exposure. Let's turn off our highlight clipping, and let's turn on our shadow clipping. And you can see we're already clipping a little bit. We're going to be represented by the blues right there. So if we turn our exposure down, and we want a nice dark moody image, well, all of this is going to be lost. And maybe that's okay for you. Maybe you want all of this detail lost. Maybe you want a very dark image, but that is one way to see that your shadows are now clipping. Everything that is blue will have that detail permanently lost forever when you export this image. And again, maybe that is an artistic choice, and maybe that's something that you want. So I'm going to hit Control Z on the keyboard to undo. I'm going to reset this exposure. It was somewhere around right there. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to hit the letter V on the keyboard again to bring our color back. So now you should have a pretty good understanding of your tones in your histogram. Color is absolutely no different. You can see now we have our color back here, and look at some of these tones we have. Let's focus in on the yellow right here. We can see we have a little bit of yellow in our highlights and our midtones, and that corresponds to these highlights right here. Highlights over here, we have some highlights and some yellow midtones. We can see that we have a lot of greens and blues in our shadows and our blacks. These are some very black and dark greens over here, some kind of mid-tone greens up here. And you can also see a lot of reds and purples and blues. Those correspond over here. They're very dark. So you can see how our histogram represents our image. And that's important to understand not only while you are shooting your images, but also while you are editing your images. Highly recommend when you're shooting to also pay attention to your histogram on your camera, because your LCD viewfinder can lie to you. You can go out and shoot some great images and come back and they're either all underexposed or all overexposed just because of the brightness of your LCD monitor. Always shoot and pay attention to your histogram. So one other neat little trick you can do with Lightroom is you can actually edit using your histogram. Let's say I want to edit the highlights in this image or the white values. I can take my highlights, I can drag to the right or drag to the left and edit my highlights directly in my histogram. And you can see we are bringing more of these yellow values. We're brightening up those yellows. We're bringing them towards the right-hand side of our image or adding some exposure. So we can do the same thing. What if we want to bring down the exposure of our entire image? Click and drag to the left of our midtones here. We're editing mostly the midtones of the image. We're bringing our exposure down. That looks pretty good. And maybe I want to bring up some of these blacks or some of these shadows. I'm going to click, drag to the right, and you can see our tonal values are moving to the right, and our shadows are getting a little bit brighter. We're getting some more color in those shadows. That looks pretty cool. Same thing with our black values. I can click and drag, and now you can see we've taken a lot of these black values that we're starting to clip over here. Turn that clipping on and off. These are no longer clipping, so we're no longer losing that detail down here in the shadows, and that is a pretty good looking image. So that is really everything you need to know about histogram. That is how you read your shadows, your blacks, your midtones, your highlights, and your whites in your histogram, and that is how all of this data represents the tones and the colors in your image. So if you found this video helpful, be sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe. Be sure to share the 30 Days of Lightroom playlist with a friend that may be learning Lightroom for the first time. And until next time, get out and go shoot.